Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. My name's Will. Today we're going to cover ball python shedding, and we're not going to do a video on difficult sheds yet. We're going to cover that on a separate day, but today I really want to focus on explaining how much of an involved and kind of stressful process shedding is for ball pythons, and I want to explain the stages of it so that you can pinpoint exactly when you need to be really careful with humidity and get good sheds going in the first place. So before we get too far into it, I've got Spot with me today. He is a pastel spot-nosed clown, and he's not actually in a shed cycle, but I wanted to hold a snake during the video, and I can't really hold one for 10-15 minutes if it's in the shed for obvious reasons, but I'll explain more in the handling part of this video later. So first of all, when we think about snake shedding in general, ball python shedding, it's a similar process in all snakes and kind of similar in lizards. They're all in a subclass of reptiles that has this almost or sometimes whole body shedding process. Certainly, mostly whole body in medium to small size snakes. And it looks to us, when we look at it, it looks a bit like a snake has just shed the tough outer layer of its skin to grow more, and that's the kind of explanation that we get if we look at brief explanations in some books and stuff like that. But the reason it's actually so stressful and such a difficult time for them is because it's a much more involved process, and by involved I mean a deep tissue process. So snake skin, it is capped with a hardened outer layer which doesn't rub off well, which doesn't grow well, and that's called the Oberhautchen layer. I can't actually remember where the name came from, but that's what it's called. and under this layer there are several other deeper layers of tissue that differentiate and come away with the Oberhautchen layer when the snake sheds. I'm going to put up a diagram so you can see what I'm talking about, but what I'm trying to explain is it isn't just the very outer layer. It's more than that. It's almost the equivalent would feel like having your fingernails separate and fall off, for example. So we've got in the deepest basal layer of skin cells in their skin, much like in humans and many other animals, there's a layer which is the basal layer, and that we generally call the stratum germinativum. Germinate as in same word we use for plants growing, because it's constantly making new cells, generating new cells. This stratum germinativum layer, when a shedding cycle begins, the stratum germinativum builds a whole new layer of, extra layers, but I think it's 4 or 5 extra layers of skin, which grow in under the current layers, the current scales, and this is then called the inner layers. Right, and those layers that are above it, which are going to be replaced, are pushed up, and those are now called the outer layers. So we've got the inner layers, which are composed of everything, every layer the skin needs and has, but isn't yet capped with an Oberhautchen layer. And then we have the outer layers, which are the older layers of skin, which are capped with an Oberhautchen layer, and those are the ones that are all going to be shed off in one go. So this process starts, they start to differentiate. That's when you see your snake starting to look a bit drab and then milky-eyed and kind of uncomfortable basically as well. And then halfway through this process, this milky fluid that we see that makes their eyes go cloudy acts as almost like an oil to separate the inner layers and the outer layers. The outer layers separate, they all die off. The inner layers develop fully with the liquid between them, and the inner layers are then capped with a new Oberhautchen layer, and the liquid dries up again basically, but it served its purpose of protecting the inner layers while the outer layers grow, and it separated them. So after that liquid has gone clear again, the inner layers are complete. They've got an Oberhautchen layer. They are completely ready to go. They are a brand new skin, mostly. The stratum germinativum isn't replaced, for example, but most of the layers are new, completely replace the outer layers, and then the outer layers are ready to go. And it is at that point that, excuse me, it's at that point that the snake can shed its skin and it comes out bright, shiny and new and looking like it's got a new paint job, basically. So, the 4 stages of shedding are... I'm not sure what he's doing. He's kind of trying to wiggle backwards and then goes forwards again. The 4 stages of shedding as we see them, not that are, well, I should say the 4 visual stages of shedding are your snake going dark, the belly going pink, the eyes going milky, and then the eyes going clear and the skin going clear again. So what I want to do now is take you over to some of my babies from last year who are kind of pretty much within those 4 stages and see what they look like. Then we'll come back and finish the video. Okay, so I've got 4 young ball pythons in here which are roughly within the 4 different stages of shedding. As you can see, they're quite agitated, they're quite annoyed, and that's pretty normal because shedding is a stressful time, and generally I wouldn't do this kind of thing if it wasn't to try to help the rest of you recognize these stages and to help your snakes have better sheds. So I'm going to try and get through it and kind of explain it as best I can in the kind of shortest time I can, if that makes sense. This won't do them any harm, they just don't really like it. But anyway, they're obviously going to try and escape every second of this video. So let's go for the first one. I'm just looking before I open up. Number 1 is an acid pastel possible het clown male. And when you look at him, you're obviously going to say, well, he looks completely normal, and he does. But generally this morph is quite bright, and this guy in particular has quite nice yellows most of the time, and you can see right now he's not yellow. So really, I'd say kind of over the last week, he's gotten darker. You notice it especially on the yellows and the lighter tones, but he's gotten darker overall. He's more drab, and you can just tell, you can see it coming on gradually. And also he's lost some of that iridescence. He looks less iridescent when you look at him in the sunlight or in bright lights. I mean, acids usually have really nice kind of purplish indigo kind of iridescence to them. But this darkening, this general lack of colour, when this snake is feeding and otherwise healthy, that is your first stage of a shed cycle. You know they're preparing for it hormonally and it's about to start. And he's not behaving too bad now. But yeah, I know that's kind of a subtle clue and I haven't shown you a before and after, but if your snake does go darker over a period of a couple of weeks, that is a pretty good clue most of the time. So right after that, you go to, well, I'm almost knocking the camera over again. Try not to squash anyone. You go to the second stage. This one's really annoyed. And the second stage is pink belly. So pink belly is the stage after the one I've just shown you. I don't know why I said that, it's kind of obvious. You can kind of still see it on this snake. There's a pinkish hue to the belly. When it first starts, I caught this one a bit late, but when it first starts, the belly goes really pink all the way up and down, and not long after the pink belly, the milky eyes start. But you can see he still looks kind of normal, but really the belly was, up until today, was very, very pink, and you've still got some of that pinkish hue, that pinkish tone down it. Now, pink belly, when it's not related to a shed cycle, can be a sign of a respiratory infection. So if it isn't followed up by milky eyes within a few days, you need to check it out. And it's also worth mentioning that pink marks on the belly, when they aren't, diffused like that across the whole of the belly, can be a sign of burns. Often burns just look bright pink at first and then they bubble or blister afterwards. And it can also be a sign of necrotizing dermatitis. But if your snake's whole belly goes pink after going dark like that, it is perfectly normal and it's just the second stage of shedding, so long as it is followed by milky eyes. See, this guy's starting to behave now as well. But yeah, so obviously it's a shame that I didn't catch this guy quite early enough, but yeah, anyway, it gets quite a bit pinker than that as well. He is getting tired of this now. Anyway, right after come on. Knocking over the camera again, but that's to be expected when you're handling lots of snakes on your own. Here we go. Stage 3 is the milky eyes. So, I'm saying milky eyes, but I've got to restrain him a little bit. There you go. Very blue, milky eyes. And that is a definite sign of a shed. But I'm saying milky eyes, and obviously looking at this guy, you can tell it's milky all over. All the dark coloration has that milkish, whitish hue to it. And this lasts a few days, but it depends on the age, obviously. This guy's really impatient. He's really pissed off. This is a typical yellow belly, because all they care about is food. Other than that, they seem to want to be left alone. But anyway, when that pink belly stage sets in that I showed you a moment ago, that's when that differentiation between the layers of tissue in the skin starts to happen and they begin to separate. And right after that begins, this milky stage comes in. I can't remember what the milky fluid's called, to be honest. I know there's a name for it and I've completely forgotten. Sorry about that. I need to clearly go back to university at some point. But anyway, this milky fluid comes in right after the process begins to help separate the deeper and the more superficial layers, often called the inner and the outer layers, to help separate them and help them come apart. It's almost like a lubricant, and it also kind of, I imagine it does help protect the inner layers while this process is going on. But yeah, you can tell they're stressed. They don't like being handled in this state. This guy's been okay, really. Anyway, we're going to let him go because he's clearly had enough. And then right after the milky stage, again, this is a bit hard to define. If I can get him. Babies are always fun when they get in this mood. A little bit of chaos. This guy still is a bit milky, but his eyes are beginning to get a bit better now. Notice he is less milky on the sides, less milky on the belly. The coloration is starting to turn to normal again, but drab. Okay, his eyes probably still look a bit milky. Well, they're getting clearer. You can tell they're less blue, they're less milky. They're going clear again, the skin's going clear, but there's no iridescence here, it's drab. He feels a little bit dry, he doesn't feel quite like the others. And this is stage 4. So after your snake's eyes have stopped being milky, those top layers are drying and separating. The inner layers are being capped with a hard outer layer so that they are completely ready. And when that final bit of a process has happened, so in probably a couple days for this guy, that liquid will have completely dried, that milky fluid, and he'll shed. And that is the end of it. So at this point, this is where you really want to make sure your humidity is perfect. Up until now, you can kind of get away with it not being great. But when they get to this stage, the eyes are going normal again. You need to make sure that their hiding place is nice and humid and that they can shed easily. So now we've had a look at those babies and you can kind of tell what you're looking for, particularly when the eyes are going clear again. That is your moment to, basically really pay attention to your humidity, get it up as high as you think is safe and hygienic. Up to 80% is totally fine, just to make sure that it sheds properly. That's a good time to moisten the substrate. As you can see, I'm putting up a table here with the actions to take during each stage. If your humidity sits at 70% all the time and it's great and they shed no problem, then don't worry about this table, don't worry about the actions. If your humidity fluctuates a bit, like mine does sometimes if I have central heating on too much during winter, then you can pay closer attention to this table. But what I want to hopefully have you all take away from this overall, is that after the eyes go clear, when we're going into stage 4, that is when you need to pay really close attention to humidity. So even if you have had a lot of humidity issues, if you can watch these stages and then get to stage 4 and know that a shed is going to happen, somewhere within 1 to 3 days, that is the moment when, even if you're on newspaper, you can go up to the snake's hide, pour some around the hide and moisten the substrate around the hide. And even if you've had bad humidity for a week or so, if you do that at that point, if you learn to recognize that point, you can actually get a good shed despite having difficulties with humidity. So that is really an important kind of place in time to be aware of and to get used to actioning, if that's a word. Anyway, now we've kind of covered what shedding is, what happens, and what to look out for. Another common thing we're told is that ball pythons won't eat when they're shedding, and I find that to be mostly true. I'd say maybe 95% of them won't eat, but I have snakes that will eat no matter what happens, mainly because I keep them in tub setups, and they do feed a lot better in tubs. I know that upsets people, but it's got to be said. I have some babies that will eat even if their eyes are cloudy, and you'll have some snakes that just will and some that just won't. Now the question is, do I feed mine when they're in shed though? And to be honest, no, I never feed them when they're in shed. Even if they are really hungry and they're babies, I tend not to feed them when they're in shed, because my thinking is that shedding is an added stress on the body. It takes energy. Stress affects all kinds of things that, perhaps we don't even fully understand. That's certainly true in humans, for sure. But my thinking is that probably digestion and everything else probably goes more smoothly when an animal is less stressed. And there's not really much you can do about your snake being stressed when it's in shed. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's also worth remembering that hormones regulate everything. Hormones regulate metabolism and digestion, and hormones also regulate shedding. So is my theory correct that it's probably best just not to feed them when in shed? Who knows, but it could be. But really, ultimately it is up to you. It won't do your snake any harm if you feed it when it's in shed and it wants to eat. That's totally fine. I just tend not to. This is personal preferences that you'll learn with your animals over time. And like I say, most of them just won't eat anyway. So after that, the next big question is handling them when they're shedding. So when I was doing the video of the babies, they actually got quite annoyed because most of them were in shed or in different stages of shedding. And ball pythons are not good at showing aggression after a certain age. After a month or so, they're not very good at showing aggression. They don't know how to show how angry they are about something other than by pooping. So what happened was I actually had to do that video I showed you earlier twice, because one of them did a massive dump halfway through and it actually triggered the others to get angry and poop as well. So I had to clean out that container and start over. But that is a surefire sign that they were stressed out, they were getting angry, and they weren't enjoying being handled at that time. And like I said, I wouldn't handle them in shed for more than a few seconds, unless it was to do a video and to try and help give information to all of you. Now, at the same time, people get, sorry about the chair squeaking again as usual, people get really uptight about stuff like that. So you'll see, someone holding their snake in shed and accidentally put it on Facebook. That's a big mistake. People practically screech at you over the internet. Again, if your snake is in shed, I wouldn't recommend handling it just for enjoyment or just for exercise. I mean, Spot doesn't really enjoy being handled. This is for exercise, really, that I actually get him out. But sometimes you may need to handle your snake for, a little 10-minute spell to clean it out, or even if it's in shed, but it's managed to go into its water bowl and dump water all over the substrate, and you feel that it's too damp, it's unhygienic, or it has, defecated somewhere. They don't usually do that, but sometimes they will do it before a shed as well. Then you might have to remove your snake from its enclosure, put it into a holding enclosure while you clean it out. And handling like that, it's necessary. It's not going to do any harm to your snake. There's no point being too uptight about these things, because animals' hygiene is always the most important thing, and if they need to be handled, they need to be handled. So don't worry about it too much. Just don't handle your ball python for fun while it's in shed. That's all I'm going to say about that. Anyway, I'm going to stop it there for this video. I've successfully annoyed all of those baby ball pythons, generated a lot of poop and cleaning, even though Spot here is pretty chilled out. But I hope that's been kind of a more in-depth explanation of the shedding process and why it's stressful than you would usually get. And I hope that I've given you some decent kind of tips to look out for if you want to get good sheds and know when to be really careful about humidity. But as always, please do like and subscribe, and please do get in touch and comment and ask questions. and give your advice in the comments, because I like hearing other people's ideas on keeping snakes. I don't really want this channel to be limited to just my ideas. Thank you very much.